I'm a pastor, focused on working with young people. I'm a counselor, training at the moment in marriage and family therapy. And a believer. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus as the Son of God. I'm a mother of 3, Gen Z's, and the next one after that, we are yet to catch up. But all in all, glad to be here. Yes.
Hey,
one
people.
important thing, I'm a wife. Lest there be any doubt, I'm a wife to one husband named David Ewagata. Yes.
Hey people, my name is Caleb, and the only thing I have in common with you is that I'm a Christian. I'm an instrumentalist. I play the guitar here in MYF, and I do not have quite as long a portfolio as you do. Okay. I'm not married.
Mm-hmm. And the other person knows that.
They might. I hope so.
Okay.
I would hope so.
Very important.
Getting with the program. Yeah. It's not easy. You walk out today and, for example, people my age, they're going out, they're drinking, they're doing all these things that are prohibited in the Bible. Like you go down Exodus, you find things that people are doing today that they shouldn't be doing. So the fact that everywhere you go, you're going to interact with such people. You go to school, you're going to meet them. You go to church. Even in churches, you're going to meet such people. So that makes you really question your faith. That makes it very difficult to keep following the book, because it's natural for people to want to be accepted. You want to fit in with every group that you're with, right? Because you go somewhere, you don't want to be shunned, you don't want to be kept aside. You feel that, what's it called? FOMO, that fear of missing out. So yes, it's difficult, and yes, it's going to be troublesome, but you're obviously going to still also meet people who share the same beliefs as you. So I still believe it's possible.
All right. As you grow older and older and more aware of your surrounding, of the world, of the environment we live in, you realize how broken the world is. And pain and suffering become one of the most amazing or astonishing or annoying things about life here on earth. And I think every believer comes to that place where they wonder why, if this world is, if God is loving and God is caring and God is all powerful and God is all knowing, then why would there be such suffering and pain in it? I think even more reason why we need God, because of that pain and suffering that we see in our world. And we cannot point to that and not ask, so what next? So what should we do? So what's the answer? So how do we deal? How do we approach pain and suffering in the light of what we know about God? And I believe that it's important that we engage with that question. Every believer must engage in that question. Because in entering that space, then we begin to form what informs our faith, what informs who we are as believers, rather than just following because for the sake, because that's where I found myself. And I think it's a very critical question to explore as a human being and as a believer. Yeah.
Personally, I can't really claim that I'm, the most upstanding Christian or I'm the most biblically upright. So I also still always have my questions. I'm still also, I sometimes doubt the faith, and it's not something I'm proud of, but it's something I'm working on. So I'll find myself asking, for example, a very good question that you hear all the time is, if God cares about good people, why is it that the good die young? For example, last year, I lost a friend in a car accident, and he was easily one of the best people I knew. Right? He was always there for you. He's a comforting person. He was really, he had a good heart. But he died at the age of, I believe, 23. So it's still really, really young. He hadn't gotten to experience life at all. Right? And he was the kind of person who you could sit down, you talk about the future, you talk about your aspirations, and sure, he might have the same, but it's a conversation that you can have for hours and hours. So he passed, and of course the first question I asked myself is why? Like, what happened? Why didn't he call me? Why didn't this and this happen? Why didn't things align? And the next question I would ask myself is, if God cared, why him? Right? Because there's worse people. Like, there's people who, for example, this story that happened recently in Kasarani, the guy who killed a young man. So the question becomes, why would God take away the friend of mine who was very good, right? He was a very, very nice person. And instead he leaves this guy who just murdered a guy for the sake of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And pain and suffering, loss, tragedy, cause us to really ask that question. Why? And where are you? And one of our experiences in ministry was serving at a church in Rwanda. And, the history of Rwanda is that, 29 years ago, there was something unbelievable that happened. And whenever we engaged with young people from that space, they had a different narrative and a different story to tell from what a young person in Kenya would how they view the world has been totally changed and affected by that. The suffering, the pain, we don't know why and how this happened. And, for most is, where was God when this happened? And it's a real question. And I think one of the things that I know is that God is not intimidated by our questions, especially when we question him, when we question his existence, when we question his love, when we question his presence with us, when we question his wisdom in terms of like, why would you, like, you're wise. This person, in my view, it would be wise that they live, that they, that they stay longer, that they, it just doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And so I think, in my view, as we go through this life, there are things that speak out so loudly that cause us to ask that question. Where were you? Why? Why me? And God invites us into that space. And I know, contrary to what we probably have heard or been told, is, especially in the scenario where death and loss is involved, we're told, don't ask questions. Don't, just accept. And yet it's not within us to just accept. We are humanly created instinctively to ask why. Why me? And it's in how we deal with that question then that we move from a point of crisis to a point of faith, I believe. This faith is not for only good times. It's not meant to just make our lives smooth and everything to just fall in place. It's meant to be experienced within the suffering, the pain of living this human existence. Yeah.
Going back to the prompt, in such a situation, how do you bounce back to your faith? How do you bring yourself back to the Lord when the first thing, or rather the only thing on your mind is why this happened or why he allowed it to happen? Because at the end of the day, he is omniscient, he's omnipresent. So it was within his power. Everything is within his power. So how do you bring yourself back to him after witnessing such a thing or experiencing such a thing?
As I said, God invites us into, he gives us an invitation to engage with him. I look at Job, and the many atrocities he had to go through. And I believe there's a reason why his story is there.
Yeah.
Because this is a man who's upright, he's living right, he's doing everything by the book. He's making every effort. And in fact, when his books are opened before God's presence, even the devil acknowledges this is a good man. And then he loses everything, which for us is unfair.
Yeah.
And injustice is one of those things that kind of cause us to really get angry at God and at ourselves and at humanity. And yet God, he goes before God and God invites him and says, yes, come, stand like a man. Let's talk about this. Ask me whatever question. And then God asks him questions, many questions.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, we see a man who's broken and has lost everything, including his own health. And, you would think this guy would be the only last thing remaining is for him to die, basically.
Yeah.
And his wife tells him, by the way, you are just a candidate for death. Just curse God and die. It's over. Like, there's nothing left. There's no hope left for you. And yet God invites him into this conversation. And so one of the things I would say is get into a conversation with God about your doubts. God, I don't believe in you anymore. I have issues with A, B, C, D. Why? Or, whatever it is that you feel is a reason for you to doubt him or to question his existence. God invites us into a conversation. So I would say go into a conversation with God. Even at that place of unbelief, go into that place with asking God, I have this question and that question and that question. And he promises he will engage us even